Welcome to Connecting the Dots, the Longevity Playbook. In today's episode, we dive into one of the biggest modern health threats, chronic stress, what it is, what it's doing to our bodies, and how to manage it to make it better. I'm joined by two powerhouse guests, Dr. Krista Scott-Dixon and Dr. Lou Atkinson, both behavioral scientists with deep, diverse careers in health, academia, and digital wellness. They share personal stories, professional insights, and science-backed strategies to help us reduce stress and improve Healthspan. We explore the hidden toll of stress, why women often normalize it, and the tools from sensory coping to behavioral activation that actually work in the real world. Plus, we reimagine the gym, rethink motivation, and highlight community-first wellness models. This episode is packed with insight, compassion, and practical solutions. Let's get into it. Welcome to Connecting the Dots, the Longevity Playbook. I'm really excited about this episode because I'm a huge fan of both of the women on this call and have been for a long time. And I'm not going to, I actually don't even have to do much to set you up for the introduction because I think you have so much to say about who you are and where you've come from. But that's actually my first question. And I'm going to start with Krista. So can you connect the dots from where you started at the beginning of your career to where you are today?
Yeah, well, if we're going to go all the way back, I actually started off in fine arts, visual arts and film, and then pretty quickly got into women's studies and cultural production, which then morphed into women's health, women's work, women's employment. So my PhD was on women working in IT, which feels so quaint now, but it was big in the 90s. Trust me, it killed in the 90s. And then, I did a stint in occupational health. And then that sort of took me, I'd always been interested in health and fitness, starting with my own kind of trying to fix myself in the 90s, basically being an out of shape grad student, trying to figure out why living on chicken wings and beer was not giving me the best life I'd hoped for. And then, so I had this interest in health and fitness, started a women's weightlifting site. And then from then, leveraged my teaching and research background into the new world of online coaching in the early 2000s. And then from there, developed curriculum in a whole variety of areas, whether that's nutrition, lifestyle, stress, sleep, most recently menopause with Girls Gone Strong. And so now my day job is I work with an app called Simple. It's like we're working on, really kind of building out the AI health coaching model to support people with all these different kinds of habits. I work with Girls Gone Strong. I see one-on-one clients actually quite differently. I work with a lot of military, tactical first responders on performance psychology. So that's kind of an interesting, group for someone who has like a gender studies background, but it actually works wildly well. And then I have this project I'm working on called the 1% Better Academy, which as its name implies is like, how to get 1% better using small incremental behavioral changes. So I guess the common thread throughout all of this is really just a real curiosity in like what makes people change for the better and how can we help and how can we support that? How can we facilitate that process to really nurture like people's development in whatever direction that they want to go.
Wonderful. And like such a range of experience and range of thinking. I think that's the coolest part of giving the whole introduction, maybe even from the beginning, because, who would have guessed if they met you now that you started in fine arts? So yeah, it's always a long and winding path, but each piece has its own part of the puzzle, I think. Lou, over to you.
Yeah, so also a long and winding path for me. So if we go back to, my first degree was psychology and management. So my first role was in a big telecom company, and I was actually managing field engineers, doing a job I could never have done in a million years. But it was really great to be able to focus purely on people management and really sort of apply the psychology side to how we, support individuals to do their job well and develop themselves and and progress if they wanted to. And then I moved into customer relationship management, also using my psychology there to understand again how people behave and what their expectations are. And this was all a revelation for me because I did my degree purely so I could get a graduate level job. I never thought I would use any of this at all. Then after 7 years there, I wanted to do something that had a bit more personal meaning for me, telecoms just wasn't something that I felt passionately about. So having done a little bit of fitness work in my spare time through my early 20s, just through wanting to learn more about my own body and my own fitness, similar to you, Krista, I went full-time into fitness, self-employed, personal trainer, group exercise, health coaching, that kind of stuff. And again, realized psychology was going to be super important at this point, because I had a whole bunch of clients who seemed to be super motivated to change their lifestyle, but completely unable really to make any significant headway. So I enrolled in a part-time master's in health psychology, and that sort of changed my world again. I got really fascinated by the psychology of how people engage with their health and how professionals work with individuals on their health. So I then pivoted into academia and was a full-time researcher for 9 years, where I completed my PhD by publication on women's engagement in weight management behaviours and services during and after pregnancy. So I had this huge interest and passion for health behaviours during and after pregnancy, and I've continued to really focus on that a lot in my career. Did 5 years also as a lecturer, so teaching psychology at undergraduate, postgraduate level as well, which I loved, but was tricky from a work-life balance perspective. Higher education is a very stressful place to work. So I pivoted into digital health in 2022 and was head of research for a company doing digital exercise prescription for people with long-term health conditions, which was, again, fascinating, and another opportunity to employ that behavioural science in terms of how we could help people to engage with the digital platform so that they could get the best results possible. And yeah, now as an independent consultant and part of the collective, I really try to find ways to apply that behavioural science in lots of different contexts. So working with fitness operators, still working in public health, working with healthcare providers as well. And yeah, just trying to make the best use I can of the expertise I've developed over the last 20 or so years.
Thank you so much. And I love hearing like the common threads through both of your careers, and also that unique transition, I guess, between academia and actual commercial space, and really trying to apply and not just teach. And I think it's really valuable and important. So we're leaning in hard on the behavioral science side of things, because today we're talking about stress, in particular chronic stress, and its impact on health span and longevity. So it's a big question, and it's kind of an obvious question, but I do feel like we need to start there to be able to branch off the conversation. So Krista, what does the current evidence tell us about the relationship between chronic stress and health span?
Okay, well, obviously like a pretty big question, but for the listeners, maybe it's helpful to first of all distinguish what is chronic stress versus acute stress, right? So acute stress is a very like short-lived, short-term kind of stressor, and a lot of the times we actually get better after acute stress. So a great example is like a workout, right? A really intense workout, and then that lasts, I don't know, an hour. And then after the workout, you recover and you get stronger, right? So a lot of the times, acute stressors can really provoke this very adaptive response in us. In the moment, it's maybe awful, but then we recover and we get better. Whereas chronic stress is like a grinding, like unrelenting, long-term set of stressors. And for most people, especially women, it's cumulative, right? It's the aging parents, it's raising teenagers, it's your job, it's commuting, it's the dog, barfed on the rug again. Like it's just a cumulative set, which we call the allostatic load. So the allostatic load is like the cumulative total of all of the stressors. And typically I find with my clients, when I ask them about the stressors in their lives, and I'm very like, well, what about this? What about that? There are so many things that women especially have that they don't even realize is a thing, because it's sort of become like the white noise of their life. Like, well, doesn't everybody have that? Well, not really, like not necessarily, or I didn't realize that was a stressor. I just thought it was like my life, right? So that's one of the things to call out. And so, what we know is that there's got to be this relationship between stress and recovery. So if you want high performance, this is something I talk about with my high performance clients. If you want the high performance, you have to have the deep lows of rest and restoration and recovery, like deep sleep and deep calm and deep parasympathetic activation, if you want these high highs. And so what happens with chronic stress is we stay in what I call the crap zone. So high highs are great with low lows, but what we get in chronic stress is this like constant, like always on, never relaxed, like just kind of like a bumblebee buzzing all around of like chronic hypervigilance. So basically scanning the environment for threats at all times. So you think of like how moms operate, right? Always scanning. What's my kid doing? Do they have a sharp object? Are we out of broccoli? Right? Just like constantly scanning for threats, and you never really switch off. So when you're resting, you're not really resting. It's not restorative rest. It's just staying still in one position, right? Until the next bout of hypervigilance. And so what we know of this kind of chronic stress is that it degrades us at the psychological level, emotionally, socially. It also degrades us physiologically, right? So we can look inside bodies and see the chemical markers of this, the genetic markers of this. So we can actually see in your body, there's particular chemicals that are elevated that are, let's say, markers of inflammation or of your body believing that it's about to die, basically.
Right.
And so over time, cumulatively, we know that this increases our risk for chronic diseases like cardiovascular disease, other risk factors like high blood pressure, all kinds of kind of chronic metabolic diseases. Obviously, it interferes with our sleep, which then cycles. And so not only does our physical health kind of just progressively degrade, there's also pretty strong evidence that it shortens our lifespan as well, a lot of the time due to some of these, chronic illnesses. And again, I want to be really clear, it's not a single factor cause and effect, right? There's lots of stuff in the mix. Like, let's say you're chronically stressed, now you aren't sleeping. Well, now if you aren't sleeping, you're not getting the metabolic regulation and brain cleaning that offers. So now you have another risk factor, right? So it's kind of just like risk factor on risk factor. And maybe you're coping, right? Maybe you're drinking, maybe you're smoking, maybe you're eating foods, way too many of them, of the wrong foods, right? Maybe you're not exercising. So from this kind of multifaceted perspective is progressively what, degrades your physical and psychological health, and then also quite potentially shortens your lifespan.
I mean, I guess that's why it's such a big question. It's almost like the air. It's everywhere. It's like ubiquitous, right? Like it's just, it's very individual, and yet it's universal, and then it's very hard to nail down. Is there a measurement of like allostatic stress load? Is it like a scale thing that I do for myself, or is there something that I can do to kind of evaluate what my stress load is so that I can measure it over time?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, there are stress questionnaires, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a very classic one that was developed in the 60s by a couple of white men. And so it doesn't include a lot of the domains that we would actually want to look at as relevant. So when I worked for Precision Nutrition, we did our sleep, stress, and recovery certification. I updated it to include things like racism, geopolitical events, chronic marginalization, sexual violence, again, a lot of the things that a lot of women just have as the fabric of their lives. So I think we also want to, first of all, understand this is not just an individual thing, right? This is the organism living in an ecosystem, right? And the ecosystem right now is currently deeply problematic for the organism. So it's not just like a you problem or a me problem, like I'm not a good enough stress responder. It's that the context in which we live has become almost totally overwhelming for us as organisms. So that's the first piece I'd say. But in terms of like, can we categorize this? The funny thing about stress, it's a bit like pain in that it's very subjective, right? For instance, some people would find coming on this podcast and talking very stressful. I don't, right? I'll show up and talk about anything. So for me, this experience is not a stressor. For some people, it would be, right? So what we kind of say in the field of stress is it's not necessarily what happens to you, it's how you respond. So we know that different people kind of have different baseline stress sensitivity or stress reactivity, whatever you want to call it. And if you're a parent that has multiple kids, you probably know this, right? One kid is chill, one kid is more anxious. Like my partner has a daughter who's now 13. it's fascinating to me because this kid really is not anxious. Like her dad is super chill. He's one of those people that like says, "Don't worry," and like really means it. You know what I mean? Like I don't understand this,
I
right?
don't get it. No.
But she's inherited this temperament, right? And so it's fascinating to watch a person who just really doesn't get anxious that much. Stuff just doesn't hit them in the same way. So each of us has our own individual stress sensitivity. A lot of women are kind of late diagnosed neurodivergent, and often they get tagged earlier as like too sensitive, has too many big feelings, too anxious, all that kind of stuff. So, but then, we can measure your reactions. Like we can look at your life and say, how are you dealing? How are you reacting? How are you coping? Is it adaptive? Is it maladaptive? So there's no objective stress score. We can look at your history and say, what happened to you and what are you dealing with now? We can ask about your response to it.
Mm-hmm.
We can ask, how does it feel? But for a lot of women, it's like beneath the radar. I'm fine. Everything is fine. And then like your body is just breaking down, right? So if we look at like a multifaceted analysis, then we can see that it's, there's some issues there. But there's no objective level of stress. The last thing I'll say is working with high performers. It's like they jump out of planes for fun. Like it's their weekend hobby. Me and some buddies are going to get together and jump out of planes for the weekend, right? Like, so what's stressful to me would not be stressful to them. So I guess to close it out, what I'd say is if you're someone who's noticing a high load of stress in your life and thinking, what's wrong with me because I can't cope with this? There's very likely some
Combination.
match between exactly who you are and what you're dealing with that is resulting in this outcome.
I'm so happy that we've recorded all of that because it's really a beautiful web of explanation because it is so broad. So thank you for taking that on. I want to dive into like the main factors that you think are contributing to chronic stress today. Lou, do you want to tackle that first?
Oh, well, I think Krista has touched on a lot of those. And that is the thing is like a lot of things that around health, there are layers and there are levels.
Mm-hmm.
And so some of the big things that Krista has touched upon around things like racism, misogyny, all of these kinds of things that people just have to live with day to day. And so they don't recognize that as a stressor because it is their experience through their whole life. So they're not recognizing that, but that is adding to that load. And the analogy I always tend to use when I'm talking to people about stress, which is not as eloquent as how Krista has described the allostatic load, is it's like a shopping basket. You keep putting things into your basket and eventually they're going to flow over the top or the handle is going to fall off. And so if we think about what we are dealing with on a societal level and on an environmental level. So we've got the discrimination, the stigma that a lot of people live with. Then you've got the environmental situation that people are living with. It might be poor housing. It might be lack of green space. It might be pollution, these kinds of things. That's already filling up the majority of your shopping basket. So actually, it doesn't take very much additional stress to push you over the edge because a lot of people are, and as always, there's inequity in everything. So if you are living in a deprived area, if you are a marginalized community, your baseline is much higher in terms of levels of stress. You're also then more likely to encounter additional stresses because of the environment and the communities that you live in. So in terms of those big things, we have to always remember that they exist. And as Krista has mentioned, people will develop coping strategies to deal with those. And that can be a lot around community. So if you are living in a marginalized community, the upside of that often is that people very much support each other. We have much, really, really ingrained, deep relationships with people, often more likely to live in multi-generational households. So the level of social support, which is a really key, effective coping strategy for chronic stress, often exist in those communities because they've had to develop that as a communal coping strategy. So yeah, there are all of those huge things. And then I think if we look at today's society, and I still supervise postgraduate students on their research projects, and I still have PhD students that I supervise. And if we look at the sorts of topics that they're really interested in exploring, it's quite a nice little insight into what they think is going on in the world that's worthy of study. Things like social media comes up a lot. The pressure of being constantly, first of all, constantly comparing yourself to other people on social media. So that's a huge stressor for lots of people. Then the pressure to put out a public display of your life that isn't necessarily authentic to the life that you are living, and that dissonance between those two is really difficult for a lot of people to handle. Then we have, again, a rising gap between rich and poor, where we're getting a much greater disparity between the people, the haves and the have-nots. And so the people at the lower end of that range are experiencing additional stresses now because cost of living is just higher and higher, and there's less hope of being able to be socially mobile and progress your way out through hard work and determination and application. So I think those are some of the key things that we are dealing with in the sort of modern world, as well as the general technology, the rapid pace of technology. You don't have to be particularly old now to feel that technology is outpacing you. The differences between generations is becoming more marked, I think, and that can leave people feeling quite disconnected for individuals. So, we're dealing with a lot.
The baseline is already extremely high
for a lot of people.
Yeah. Okay. And then just like putting the chain together is like, high stress is something that's difficult to deal with. If we're not intentional about creating space for recovery, we're probably operating on the high end at all times. So kind of almost glitching or worse. And then there's a physiological impact of this high stress level in our body, which can lead to a number of different chronic diseases, which will impact our health span, which is the link to longevity. So just making those links. So what I would love to start talking about is, what are the tools, the skills that are necessary to start creating space for ourselves to deal with the stress? Krista, you want to start there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the word skills is really helpful here because, let me kind of preface this, right? We're not going to self-care our way out of oligarchic capitalism, right? Like, let's be real about the limits of what we can do for ourselves. But that being said, one of the diagrams I like to draw with my clients is 3 circles. And so the largest circle is like, what is out of your control? The middle circle is what do you have some control over? And then the inner circle is what do you have almost total control over? And then the total control circle, or almost total control, is where we double down. All right. So, and this is really helpful for people, I think, just to map out initially, because I think they see, like, I'm trying to be general manager of the universe a lot of the time. And it's helpful to see, like, actually what is out of my control. You can still care about it, obviously, but you don't clutch it so hard trying to fix it. So that's kind of the first piece. And I think, one of the first skills is not even necessarily a behavior. It's almost like a philosophy, which is understanding the relationship between stress and recovery, or stress and restoration, or stress and, replenishment. I actually think that in like Western Anglo culture, we don't even have a concept of rest and recovery and replenishment and restoration. Because I think if I asked the average, middle-class woman, how do you rest? They'd be like, oh, no, I can't rest because that's unproductive. Or when they crash out, they feel unproductive, like they always should be doing something. So
It's
one of the first
culture.
skills, yeah, it's hustle culture, like constantly. And it's also a very real set of demands. You lie on the couch. It's funny because I had a client once. I was like, just like lie on the couch for 5 minutes and stare at the ceiling. And she's like, I can't because my kitchen sink is in my field of vision. And all I can see are the dishes in the sink. So I was like, okay, shut your eyes, right? But so the first skill is really shifting towards an understanding of how stress and recovery need to be 2 halves of the same coin, and that recovery and replenishment and restoration are fundamental. They are not a nice to have, they're a need to have. And then the other skill, again, more of a philosophical skill, is self-compassion. And this is actually wildly difficult for a lot of women to have. They're super compassionate about other people, animals, but not about themselves. So before we even get to like the nuts and the bolts, we have to start with the philosophy of like, rest is a thing, and you need to be kind to yourself. Like, stop being a dick to yourself, basically. Don't be I always say, like, the world is full of abusers and assholes. Don't install one in your head. Don't be the asshole in your own head, right? Let the assholes be out here. We don't need more of them, right? So just fostering the habit of friendly, loving kindness and self-encouragement. Self-stewardship is a term I like to use. Self-leadership. A lot of women don't like self-compassion. It's too soft. So I use other words. Even self-care for some women is like, ugh, right? So I use self-stewardship, self-ownership, self-leadership, that kind of stuff. Self-governance, whatever sort of hits for people.
Yeah.
So those are the two pieces. I don't know, Dr. Lou, I'd be curious, like, where you begin.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think for me, the fundamental part when we think about stress and coping is absolutely understanding what you have control over and not allowing the things that you have no control over to be a cause of stress. So there's often a lot of reframing that needs to be done. And again, if we talk about women, there's often a lot of guilt, okay? And that in itself adds to the shopping basket, it adds to the load. This internalized guilt that women feel for a lot of different things, for having a career, for having children, for not having children, et cetera, et cetera. But on a more micro basis, on a day-to-day basis, as you've mentioned, Krista, it's that balance between, if I take time to do something that helps me recover, restore, or just regain control, there's probably something that I'm not doing that I'm going to feel guilty about. So we have to support people to understand that everyone benefits from taking more control over your life and increasing your sense of control. And I've often, when I've worked with individuals, used a great piece of advice that was given to me. It's not my advice, which is that you actually always have control over your situation. There are always multiple things that you can do. Now, all of the choices except the one which is the only one you can think of, might seem completely crazy. But just knowing that you have other choices reduces that, that cortisol level, that level of adrenaline, and can start to bring you more clarity. So if you're stuck in traffic, you feel helpless. You feel like there's nothing I can do about this. I just have to sit here. But that's not true. You could get out of your car and abandon your car on the highway and disappear and hitch a lift. You could get out of the car and smash it up with a crowbar. You have choices. Now, none of those choices are going to be the sensible choice, but what it means is it re-exerts control over the situation. Okay, I have a lot of options and I've decided to just sit in this traffic because this is the best option for me. So I think helping people to understand that, control doesn't mean changing things. It just means having more of a sense that you are autonomous and you are empowered. And what I mentioned was clarity. So from a psychological point of view, when we are experiencing that chronic stress, we will struggle to think clearly. We will struggle to do some of the basics around things like reasoning, making that sensible decisional balance between pros and cons, making plans, remembering to do things. And because then we recognize that perhaps we're making mistakes or we're making errors of judgment, that in itself can add to that load. Tools for me are really, really important. Giving people tools. I mean, I have more of these types of planners in my office than I think the stationer has in their shop. Because for me, those types of things enable just to take a few minutes to actually step outside of the day-to-day fuzz and say, okay, how can I actually categorize what I really do need to be doing? And that's, for me, that's the to-do list type of thing, but it can be done in any area of your life. So you can use those types of tools to give you a little bit of a further away perspective where you can actually start sorting things through, whether it's, as you say, Krista, like a Venn diagram, whether it's a mind map, whether you're using something like the life wheel approach or whether it's planning, organizing, taking that time doesn't just help with the physical act of organization. It actually, again, gives you more of a sense of control and more of a sense of autonomy. And that can be really helpful in countering the effects of that chronic stress on your brain's ability to sort of plan, organize, and reason.
What I hear both of you saying, and I think for me, this was one of the things that I was reflecting on at the beginning of listening to you describe stress, is there's a gap in vocabulary that I think people have in terms of describing what's happening to them. Like we mentioned it in terms of how women experience stress, like, oh, this is just my life. Like I didn't understand that this was a stressful thing. And this generally, like I can think of in my own case as like things that are happening in your body that you didn't know were unusual because no one told you they were unusual. And now all of a sudden you have a list of symptoms that you can start, identifying and making connections with. So I think what I hear both of you saying is we need more language around it and we need more awareness around it. Krista, I've worked with you as a coach, and a lot of the tools that you gave me and the way that you labeled them, I reuse constantly, like the notice and name, the like, are we mowing the lawn when the house is on fire, in terms of triaging the situation. And taking a moment to really reflect on, the current situation starts to help anyone articulate what the situation is and start filtering out like those elements so that they can recognize them later. So I think that like for me, what the nuggets that I'm taking out of what you're both saying is really working on the specificity of the language so that you can get a smarter outcome or a smarter solution. So like this is, tools for everyone. But, when you really want to address stress, like systematically, I wanted to explore what tools are available for people, because of course, you can go into coaching, you can go into therapy, you can go into counseling. But actually in most cases that I know of, getting access to one-on-one support isn't an option for people because there's not enough people resources to support, and or like distance, time, or finances. It all becomes really big barriers. So I wanted to talk about what you've developed in the 1% Better Academy, Krista, so that people know about different solutions to build their toolkit. Can you tell us more?
Yeah, sure. I'm just taking a couple notes there so I don't forget. So I'll tell you 3 things that in general are helpful and available to most people, and then I'll tell you what we really focus on in the 1% Academy. So one of the first ones is really understanding and trying to take care of your sensory needs. A lot of people don't realize how affected they are by sensory stimuli, right? And now you don't have to just be neurodivergent to experience this, right? But there's like, if you think about your environment, the noise, things you're eating, how you're sitting, like just what's around you in terms of the sensory input and what things you find calming from a sensory standpoint, right? My partner's daughter has this little owl puppet, like a fuzzy owl puppet that's sort of like just lying around the house. And sometimes we'll take it out and like pet it just because it's sort of fuzzy, right? And it's kind of calming to pet this thing. So like, what are the sensory things that calm you, that you have access to, right? Is it petting your dog or your cat? Is it taking a bath? Is it, just having a thing that you hold in your hand, like, I don't know, a fidget spinner, a touchstone, whatever it is. So like knowing your own sensory needs, for me, it's listening to the same song like 300 times in a row. Sometimes I get a song in my head and then when I'm working, it's just looping. I wear headphones so my neighbors don't murder me. So like, what are the sensory things that you find calming and soothing and centering? And generally, most of us have access to something, right? That's number 1. Number 2 is like getting out into nature. And I don't mean like going hiking. I mean, that's great if you can do it, but like going out of the house into fresh air and natural light, or having a potted geranium somewhere that you look at. I was actually stopping this morning to smell my neighbor's flowers. They had this really nice lavender plant. And I was like rubbing the lavender and sniffing it, right? Like, how can you engage with the natural environment, even if you live in a city? Is there a patch of grass, right? So that's the second one. The third one is like finding and building your social connections. And this doesn't have to be a partner. It can also be with animals. I think that's very underrated component, right? Dog, cat, goldfish, turtle, whatever it is. Horses are a big one. Are there people and animals in your life that feel strong and safe and secure and supportive? Even if it's that friend you only message every few months to be like, hey, listen, here's the gossip. Like, all of these people in our lives really make up an important social fabric. So really thinking about going the extra mile to nurture those relationships. Instead of texting your friend, pick up the phone and call. And I know that's going to horrify all of the younger people in the audience, but that's, I think, part of the reason why younger folks are really struggling with higher anxiety, is because they're not deploying a lot of the tools that older generations had: in-person, real-time engagement and communication. So how can you make your interactions just a little bit more rich in that regard? And then the thing that we teach in the 1% Academy, it's kind of the linchpin, is in psychology what's called behavioral activation, which is basically find a thing to do and do it. So take some kind of meaningful action in the world. And we call it the 1%, obviously, because it's got to be tiny. That's what we teach. It's like, drink a glass of water. Is a glass of water too much? Whatever. Take a sip of water. Give yourself a thumbs up, right? So find some way that you can act on your world. And it's funny because we're actually just about to bring out a new course that was inspired for me by my work with the folks in the military, because they teach people, anyone who'd be going to a foreign country, what do you do if you get taken hostage? If you end up in enemy territory, if you end up in a hostile situation, what do you do? And they teach people, whatever you can control, control it. So, how do you survive? How do you escape? How do you resist? How do you evade? And so we created a little course just based on that, but we're calling it SEER for everyday life. So you're not going to be in some foreign country, but you might be in a social situation that is like, I feel trapped here. I feel trapped and I feel stuck. What do I do? So we teach people really small ways to act on their own behalf, to feel empowered and to have agency in their own lives in ways that are like super, super tiny, so that you feel like you can do it. And that's what they teach in survival situations. Like, okay, if you're locked in a box with no food, sing happy birthday to yourself over and over to keep sane, right? Like, there's always things that you can do. So that's really what we teach. And especially for women who are often disempowered, knowing that you can take some kind of action and being energized to do that is really, really useful. And then it becomes a series of behavioral experiments.
Right.
I acted on the world. What happened? Oh, this happened. Okay, cool. I wonder if I could build on that, right? Oh, I tried this, I tried that. I got really important information about myself, about the world. So it starts to have this kind of like snowball effect.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean you stack them, right? So it's almost like you climb this ladder. I want to ask a bit more about how it works with the 1% Better Academy, but I also want to share something about my sensory coping, which is weird, but it works for me. And I think I want to share it because maybe people aren't creative enough around their sensory coping. So when I get really blocked on, I need to do something big, there's a deadline, I need to do some writing, I need to do, God forbid, financial administration. And, they're like, can't get out of it. I've waited to the absolute last minute. And I know mentally that I'm not putting myself in a good situation because of the stress. Like, I'm not about to be able to perform because of the pressure I'm putting on myself. I get in bed and I turn the lights off and I do it. So that's I work best when I am stressed by putting myself in a dark room. And then when it's really bad, I'm actually in bed doing it, and somehow it works. So that realization came to me over, the work from home shift that we were able to do over COVID. But I mean, anytime I have to do something hard, I just hop in bed and it happens. Yeah, just wanted to share. And okay, so how do I join the 1% Better Academy? Am I working with a group? Am I working directly with people on an app in a e-learning environment? What does the infrastructure look like?
Yeah, so it depends. Like right now we're using a course-based model, and we have different kinds of courses, right? So some of the courses will be self-paced.
Mm-hmm.
show up, do it at your own speed, whatever. The way it started was actually just a Facebook group. We were like, let's just run a thing for people. We'll put together like 4 to 6 weeks of content for people, and then we'll just kind of coach them in the Facebook group. So that kind of grew into our first course. And so some of our courses are like coached courses online. So every day you show up, there's a website, or I mean, it's mobile friendly. It's not an app, but it's mobile friendly. You log in, you get a lesson, which is like, just some ideas, stuff to think about. Maybe it's a video from one of us, whatever it is. And then you get a thing to do, which is always super important, right? Today, here's a thing to do. Just go and act in the world. And then there's coaches, right? So every day you're asked like a prompt question or a series of prompts. Talk about this with your coaches and talk about this with the other people in your group. So it's kind of like this online learning environment where you're always engaging with other people, you're engaging with your coaches, you're getting feedback, but every day you're kind of like, we poke you every day with a specific prompt and a specific activity. So it's very like interactive and engaged. And we've been debating doing a more like real-time group coaching program. The only tricky thing is that one of the coaches is in New Zealand and I'm in Vancouver, Canada. So like sorting out the time zones is a little bit difficult, but yeah, so at this point we have sort of like a mix of like coached cohort courses and then like self-paced ones. But it's basically like, go to the website, put your information in, we'll let you know when the next thing is available.
Yeah, I think that's great, and just because it's so accessible, right? Like that you're able to just start wherever you are. Success is literally just showing up and doing small things, and I think that just it's a paradigm shift for the hustle culture. So I think it's really refreshing and wonderful. So I really want more people to explore this and poke you. Is it a possibility for companies to come to you and do it as a company cohort? Is that something that you?
Yeah, I mean, if folks are interested, by all means, reach out, right? We're happy to work with anyone and anyone. And we were actually working on something that we actually ran a cohort specifically for teachers, and especially in New Zealand, because apparently New Zealand has one of the highest rates of teacher burnout for various reasons. And so we ran a group specifically, including and recruiting New Zealand educators, as well as like, peer mentors, like educational assistants, like people who were kind of in that school space, because certainly that's a group that definitely deals with a lot of stress.
Yeah, I mean, any I guess caregiving or supporting positions, there's like high burnout rates, right? And possibly, the jobs that you're taking that aren't really aligned with, who you are and what you want to be. And so, okay, I think this is a wonderful thing that you're doing, and I hope more people reach out and engage, because it's a great tool that you can start with. I'd love to change gears and talk a little bit about the longevity boom. And actually, maybe we start with a definition, because I feel like there's so much hype in longevity. There might be a lack of definitions. So can I understand how you define longevity individually?
Wow. Ooh, I would not purport to have the definitive definition of longevity. And as you say, I think it's a new and emerging concept that everyone's grappling with. And I prefer things like Healthspan. I think that's a better sort of definition, a better construct to focus on in terms of how everyone can live a really good quality of life for the longest time that's possible for them. And actually, I think if I can sort of tie that to the previous question that you were asking, Jen, around things that individuals can do to really help them with dealing with their own stress. And I think being physically active is one of the most evidence-based tools that people can employ to help them deal with chronic stress. And it works on a number of levels. So as Krista mentioned, actually, a really hard workout is a source of acute stress. And so it's important that people who are perhaps experiencing very significant stress and they're on the edge of burnout or they're in burnout, balance hard workouts with understanding what's going on in their body at the time, because actually you can just add to that load and add to that inflammation, and it can be detrimental. But for the majority of us who are dealing with some perhaps elevation in stress through a particular period in their life. Physical activity, we know, has a very acute impact on both perceived stress, so mood, basically, when somebody does an acute bout of physical activity and you measure their mood afterwards, it's consistently elevated. They feel generally more able to cope. They feel less fatigue, all of those good things in the immediate aftermath after a workout. But what we also know is it will build physical resilience. So as Krista's really eloquently described, there's this chemical reaction that goes on in the body when we start to experience stress. And we know that if someone who is physically strong, so their cardiovascular system is strong, they have good metabolic resilience, they will cope with that sort of chemical bang that they're going to get from the stress better. So their body's better able to cope. And then what we see consistently in the evidence from people who are regularly active is that they are less prone to common mental health problems. They themselves will report that they're more able to deal with higher levels of stress. And so I think physical activity is something that we should continuously talk about as something where people can take control. It has multiple levels. So if you are someone who likes to exercise or be active with other people, you're getting that social connection at the same time, which we know is hugely important. If you're someone who likes to be active alone, then that often people report that brings up time to think, time to reflect. It gives them that little bit of breathing space and that head space that when we're in the thick of doing things, it disappears. And it comes down to control. I've taken this time, I've done this action for me. But there is the physical complement and then the psychological side of things as well. So in terms of longevity, if we're thinking about longevity in terms of, well, actually, if we're experiencing consistent high levels of stress, we know that is going to reduce both our quality of life and our duration of life, because we know the physical toll it takes on the body. Actually, trying to think about how you can incorporate some regular physical activity has its independent effects on longevity, but also will help you to cope with the stress. So the one caveat to that, of course, is that what we don't want to do is add the pressure to be active into the load that everybody is experiencing already. And what we see in today's modern society is a lot of pressure to do a lot of different things. And so I think, again, coming back to earlier questions, being able to have open and honest conversations is one of the most important things for me. I think we all need to talk about what we're going through. We need to be open about that. We need to connect with other people who will understand that, who will empathize with that, will give us that support. And so that will help us make good choices when it comes to actually, if I've got half an hour in my day, what's the best use of that for me? Is it to get my laundry done, so it's just no longer on my to-do list? Is it to go out for a walk because I know that's going to make me feel better inside? Is it to go and have a really long shower? We have to make those decisions, and we have to make sure that health-related behaviors don't become another source of stress. But evidentially, we know that physical activity is one of the best long-term and short-term strategies for dealing with stress.
Yeah, and I think for me, when there is that general advice, right, it can create a little bit of a spiral for people in terms of that decision tree. It's like exercise, and then you have to fill in how will I like it, address all of those different barriers. So this actually bridges into the behavioral science piece, and when companies design products and services, and we can go like right into the fitness side of things, because it's like, okay, go exercise, and then what's the association with exercise? Most people think about going to a gym, and then there's already many blocks along the way. So if you could redesign the gym experience for me, a complete beginner and completely inactive. I'm midlife, I'm menopausal, I've got a whole lot of risk factors that all could be addressed by taking that step to physical activity, but I'm not experienced. And, there's a gym right down the street. How could, operators design an experience that sets me up for success?
Do you want to go first, Krista? Or
Yeah, I'd love to hear what you have to say. I'd be curious.
I mean, What I love about the work that I've done and so many other people have done over the last 20, 30 years is that we really can get a good handle on what drives an individual's behavior. So, we understand the psychology now of many health behaviors, and there's many parallels between lots of different health behaviors. So when it comes to physical activity, we should be able to, with the use of technology, we should be able to provide personalized experiences to everybody based on what are their barriers and what are their facilitators and what are their own intrinsic motivators. So we know that no one is going to sustain a behavior for a long period of time unless it has some intrinsic motivation for them. So they have to start to enjoy the experience of that behavior in and of itself, not for what that behavior will bring them. And we can often start with more externalized forms of motivation, but we need to transition people to that intrinsic motivation as soon as possible if we want that behavior to be sustained. So with AI and with digital technologies now, we can ask a range of fairly simple questions that get to the unconscious drivers of people's behavior. I talk about this a lot, but currently for most places, if you go to join a gym, they're going to ask you, why are you here? What do you want to achieve? And they'll give you a drop-down list of 4 to 6 items. And it will be, I want to lose weight. I want to feel better. I want to tone up, which is a phrase that, makes me sick in my mouth. I want to get stronger. A few sort of basic tick list items. And social desirability bias means that if someone comes in and they are carrying excess weight, they're going to tick the lose weight box, because society tells them they should want to be thin. If they're going there because they've had some health information, diagnosis of a new condition, or they've been advised of a risk factor, they're going to tick the box that says, I want to get healthier. But actually, none of those things are their intrinsic motivation. And often we'll have these unconscious drivers that are going to push them away from that behavior. And that's going to include lack of confidence about how to be physically active. It's going to include the internalized stigma that many people experience when they're in those places and feeling like they don't belong. So if we can understand what those are, we can personalize that journey for them, and we can address some of those barriers, and we can tap into those facilitators. But currently we're asking the wrong questions. We're making too many assumptions. I say we as in the fitness sector, and we are not transitioning those individuals to that more internalized motivation. And that's about connecting them to people, experiences, products, services that hold intrinsic joy and enjoyment for themselves. So the vast majority of people are never going to really enjoy running on a treadmill or taking a spin class or lifting heavy weights. A lot of us do that because we know that it's the right thing to do for us, and we do it for that external reason. But we need to connect people with activities and experiences and people. This rises to the top of what they're going to use their time for. And we're only going to get to that point if we can offer enough flexibility and enough of a personalized experience for them to connect to the activities and the environments and the communities. They're going to keep them wanting to do that time and again.
So if the gyms are not doing this well, as a broad stroke, Krista, do you know anyone that is doing the needs assessment, the prescription, and the follow-up well?
Well, I'm debating whether I want to talk about what I would do if I had complete and total control of the gym environment.
No, do that. Do it.
Okay. All right. So I think that the gym model that we have is just objectively wrong, right? The gym is currently a place that is divorced from people's real life. And it's something that you have to go and do as a chore. It's very isolating. It's just a very weird artificial space. And I think, if we're trying to motivate people to do something that they don't want to do, then maybe the thing that we're trying to get them to do is the wrong thing. What do we not have to motivate people to do? We don't have to motivate them to play. We don't have to motivate them to build community. We don't have to motivate them to be in spaces that are enjoyable. And so, for example, like I live in Vancouver, Canada, which is honestly one of the most beautiful places in the world. People are always out hiking, biking, walking, doing things. People are just highly, highly active here. because we have the gift of natural spaces that have been really well maintained and preserved. And so, like we are winning on geography, but like if you think about how the environments are designed in a lot of the world right now, they're very anti-human, very anti-walkable, bikeable. People are almost blocked from engaging in physical activity. So the first thing I would do is almost do away with the gym altogether and say, what would be an environment that people would naturally gravitate to do the activities they enjoy? It would probably look like, some kind of land-based experience that people would just naturally want to go to. A community garden, a pickleball court, a place where kids and adults can play, a place where kids and adults can get together and socialize and gossip while walking. You know what I mean? I'm gesturing this as like a trail or something like that. Like, how do we build environments that people naturally gravitate to? The pickleball court down the street is slammed constantly. People have birthday parties there. Like, it's a huge social hub. No one has to motivate these people to go and do this. And so, Dr. Liu, you mentioned community, play, natural environments, doing movements that are very fun and natural and enjoyable for humans. So there's a place down the street from me that I think does a really good job of it. They're called Restore Human. And they do a lot of like play, like almost like adult gym class. People are crawling around on the floor and they're climbing on ropes and they're just playing like little monkeys like we used to as kids on the jungle gym. And so when you get in there, they might ask you like, what's broken, what's hurting, like, is there anything that we need to be aware of? But they're not going to ask you about goals. And this is something I just finished writing a textbook actually on how to incorporate counseling methods in nutrition coaching. And one of the things I talk about is that goals are meaningless for most people, right? So the fitness industry talks about goals because a lot of the people in it are ex-athletes for whom performance and goals and metrics is very salient and relevant. But if you ask the average person, what's your goal? They're like, I'm just trying to do my finances in bed. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
I'm just trying to cope with my life.
To get my financial administration done. Go away.
Just trying to be an adult right now.
Yeah.
And so in my book, I talking about things like more of like a hopeful future, right? What's the future that you hope to live? What would be meaningful for you? What do you hope to be able to do with your body or your life? What do you hope to be feeling in your body? And this kind of gets back to this thing about Healthspan. Oh, I want to feel energetic. I want to feel capable. I want to be independent as long as I can. I want to be thriving. Those are much different qualitative experiences and motivators than like lose fat. Like who cares? Like, who is motivated by that, especially in the long term? And so yeah, sometimes we have a push motivation that's like pushing us away from pain, but ultimately we want to find ways to cultivate those pull motivations. Like, there's something I want to go towards and I gravitate towards it instinctively. And so to circle back to the gym thing, it's like, again, community, play, beautiful spaces, engaging spaces, spaces where I live my life. And the gym is not this external thing that I go to as a separate part. Now, Jen, I feel like I've like completely circled around and forgot your original question. So please feel free to ask me again.
No, I might have also forgotten my original question, but no, the original question had to do with defining longevity and health span. And then we talked about like, okay, when you make a recommendation to someone and it's something like get physically active, and then that's how we went down the lane of the gym.
Mm-hmm.
How do you, like, if I'm a company that's trying to make a recommendation, create a service that's really going to help people get better, that requires habit, what do I need to think about when I'm designing the user experience or the customer experience to give them a shot of success, a shot at success? So I just threw 3 questions at you. Answer whichever has landed.
Well, I think one of the first pieces is helping people to understand that their behaviors are not just about what's happening inside themselves, right? And that they're always interacting with their environment. And so there's going to be some role of their environment. And so helping people think much more holistically and integratively and broadly about what are all of the levers that you can pull in your life and which ones are negotiable right now and which ones are not negotiable. So for example, I have a client whose older father in his 80s is quite ill. And so for the first 2 months, I work with my client and we're working on, health habits and that kind of stuff. And then his dad got sick and then he was like, oh no, like, what do I do with my health habits? And I'm like, well, think about them as anchors that you do when other things are crazy in your life, right? You're at the hospital and you're driving back and forth, right? So helping people see there's all these levers. You can think about it as like a mixing board or whatever, right? All these levers and switches that you can pull or adjust in your life depending on what's happening for you. And I think a lot of health behavior change programs, Dr. Lou, you can correct me on this one, I find them a little bit rigid. It's like, well, you should be doing this, and you should be doing this, and you should be doing this. Whereas I like to start with a very reality-based approach of like, okay, like maybe shit's crazy for you right now, but where are the places that you can act? Let's go off the script a little bit to say, okay, you know what, maybe you're going to eat cake every day and that's a non-negotiable, and you know what, okay, fine, it's dead to us. Let's talk about maybe you're going to take a walk. So what's the lever that you're willing to pull and how can I help you pull it? That's the way that companies should be thinking, as well as helping people act in their environment, because I think people are often quite unaware of how their environment influences them. So basic things, right? What's your kitchen environment look like? What's your work environment look like? What's your bedroom look like for promoting sleep? How can we make small adjustments in that environment to make the behaviors just not mindless, but bring much more ease to that? Like, for example, I don't have a car. I take public transit, I walk, I bike. No, I'm lucky because I live in a city, right? It's not an option for everyone. But simply not having a car affects my behavior in all of the ways, right? So just to kind of ask people, like, what are the levers that you can personally pull in your environment? And maybe helping empower them to pull those levers. Because I think sometimes people are like, oh no, I couldn't. Well, maybe you could. That's a testable hypothesis.
Yeah, and I think to follow that up, I absolutely agree. A lot of health behavior change programs are quite rigid and as you said, too goal oriented. They're focused on an end point. What's your end point? Whereas actually, I think what most of us want to achieve is a life that feels balanced, feels healthy, feels good to us, is enjoyable. And there isn't an end point to that. It's going to shift and it's going to change as we go through. And I think when we look at holistic health as well, I think we probably all agree that's the way we should be thinking about Healthspan, is what are all the different areas of my life and how can I achieve the optimal in one or more of those. And I think actually individuals are guilty often of trying to change too many things at once and having unachievable goals. So it's not even that the world is telling them they need to do 150 minutes of physical activity and eat 5 fruits and vegetables a day and get 7 hours sleep, etc., etc. They realize that they need to make a change, and then they try to make too many changes at once. So I think the whole academy that you're doing, Krista, is fantastic, because it's like we're just going to try and focus on real small incremental things. Coming back to the gym environment, because I feel like we've been very harsh, and I am actually one of the weirdos that does enjoy running on a treadmill and lifting heavy weights and going to a spin class. But I think if some of those gyms could offer more of a holistic experience for people and say, actually, when you first come here and you become a member, and that's a really important thing, that a lot of clubs really pride themselves on, which is it is a community. People are a member of something. Maybe the first thing you do as a member is not exercise. Maybe the first thing you do as a member is you build some social connections. You go to a workshop about sleep hygiene. You learn about your hormones, whatever it is. And then, maybe you want to quit smoking. If you want to get and have a better diet and get good sleep and all of those kinds of things, but actually you're smoking cigarettes every day, maybe the first thing you do is just get some help to quit smoking. So I think that the gym environment is great for some. It's not great for a lot of people for all the reasons you've talked about, Krista, absolutely. But I think that they can think about how they can attract people who want to change their lifestyle, and exercise isn't number one or even number two or number three. Maybe it is something that comes along later when they feel able to take that on and they feel comfortable in that environment.
I think also,
honestly, I feel like so many, oh, sorry, Jen, go ahead.
go for it. Go for it.
I was just going to say one simple intervention so many gyms can make, it's so silly, is hire the most extroverted connector person for the front desk. Because how many gyms have you gone to where you go in, the person like doesn't even look up, or it's just like, hey, right? Like that person at the front desk, you need to go and find that person who was like a camp counselor or whatever, who knows everybody, who's like super friendly, who's like a human golden retriever, to staff that front desk so that when you come in, it's like, hey, Jen, oh my God, where you been? How was your trip? I'm so happy to see you. Listen, this is happening today. We got some herbal tea on tap, like, like whatever, right? But you need like that. If I could suggest one thing for every gym is hire the right person for the front desk. That could make all of the difference. If someone offers you genuine friendliness and interest and like, I'm happy to see you, and they call you by name, like that probably doesn't cost very much, but it would make an enormous difference to the gym experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the add-on that I was going to tack on to what both of you said, it really goes back to the idea of testing and experimenting, because when you're starting a journey, you don't know what you don't know. So there should be room for play and for experimentation, and maybe, and tech can facilitate this, right? It's like, Lou, go try a stretch session, go try, how did you like that, and then we have another recommendation for you, and then based on that exploration, you'll find the thing that you like and hopefully find some sort of rhythm. So I actually think, if I could hit the reset button on the gym experience, it's really creating like that intentional exploration and the celebration of what you're doing. Because I do feel like for a lot of people, like stepping into physical activity is a little bit like stepping into an airport in a foreign country where nothing is labeled in English. Like you're kind of guessing. So, but rather than having this fixed linear journey, that you have this, like almost like the agile project management approach is like, you have a sprint, you're going to test this for a sprint, and then you're going to reprioritize, and then keep on going, because it will allow for the dynamics of life. It will allow for your interests to shift. And then eventually, I believe if you find something that you like, you'll fall into a rhythm and motivation won't be necessary. Like, I think that for me, it's the play and the experimentation that you're both referring to that needs to be through technology facilitated to kind of nudge people along the path. That was really that was a really indulgent part of our podcast. Thank you for going there. I have one more question before we wrap, and it's just a shout out question for who in your network is doing great work in this area. Who should we highlight and possibly invite as a guest for the next podcast? Lou, you want to start?
Oh, you put me on the spot, Jen. I literally did one of these a few days ago, so it's a little bit of a struggle to think of a individual. Maybe Krista can offer one, and I'll keep thinking.
Yeah, I went temporarily blank as well. But as we were talking about how to create a very inclusive gym space, the folks that also came to mind that I think are worth mentioning are a couple of friends of mine in Toronto that started a gym called Iron Lion, and it's a boxing club, but it's kind of a boxing, boutique gym, like, strength and conditioning. But the thing that they did very deliberately is they organized it around community. Their slogan is the power and the pride, right? Like the pride of lions, right? And so they began with like a community first model of what a gym could look like. So you walk in and it doesn't look like a conventional gym. It's like a big, huge room. There's lots of color. There's, all kinds of inclusion flags on the walls. There's a dog, like a friendly dog.
An actual golden retriever?
It's actually a kind of a scary looking dog that you then realize is like a lovable dork.
Yeah. Okay.
But effectively you have like a gym mascot dog that's always there. And like all of their classes, all of their training sessions are explicitly organized around this is your team, this is your group, these are your people. And it's a very body positive gym. So it's like, whatever size, shape, ability you are, they specialize a lot in like queer friendly, ability positive, again, body positive, size positive, basically like whatever you are, whoever you are, just like bring yourself. Wow. And that's very explicitly articulated. It's not just like a nice to have. It's like very clearly part of their mandate. And the social dynamic is reinforced in every single class. We're a team, we're a group, we're working together. It's such a powerful thing. And so now you're not going to the gym. You're going to see your team and your friends and your buddies and the dog and whoever, right? So, I mean, I don't know how podcasty that is. I think it would be an interesting conversation about like, how do you create this? Yeah. And so shout out to my friends, Ron and Steph at Iron Lion in Toronto. Truly a really unique and wonderful gym experience that has survived COVID. So, they got to be doing something right.
They must be doing something right. Only the strong survived that.
That's
one.
Right.
Any thoughts, Lou?
Well, I'll follow suit and I'll give a shout out to my friend as well. So I live on a very small tide island on the south coast of England called the Isle of Portland. It's for many decades been quite a deprived area. It's the young people who live here struggle with employment, and it's a very traditional sort of family. Lots of generations have lived here for hundreds of years. And when I moved here 2 years ago, I was sort of struggling to find my tribe and struggling to integrate with the community. And one of the places that I found is the Cedar Yoga Studio, which, in a similar vein to what you've described, Krista, is actually a very much a community first studio. Victoria, who created it and runs it, I've been teaching in the community for many, many years. Always, of course, wanted to have her own studio, but waited until she was ready to build the concept that she wanted to build. It's a really inclusive space. It's a really beautiful space, but she does so much for the community at large as well. So we get together and we do beach cleans. She's doing free yoga on the beach. She does events with other local businesses where they're sort of cross promoting and supporting each other. Again, very welcoming space to everybody. And not only am I a very, very avid participant in the yoga classes there, but she also now employs me to teach a strength class there every week, which, again, I think is really indicative of that type of space, that it's a really easily accessible strength-based class for people who don't really want to step into the gym environment, but recognize that they want to get strong, they want to get resilient. And so I feel very honored to be part of that particular community. And I know that she's going to be a huge success and go on to probably create the Cedar Yoga world domination program in the next few years. So I give a shout out to Vic.
Wonderful. Thank you both for your thoughts, for your advice, and for your expertise.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for tuning in to Connecting the Dots. If today sparked a new idea, helped shift your thinking, or gave you something to take forward, share it, rate the show, or drop us a message. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next conversation. Until then, keep connecting the dots that matter.